anybody didn't vote and wants to. Okay, right now I want to introduce Mr. Vince Coakley. Thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it. Vince Coakley is a top radio host on 106.3 Word in Greenville, South Carolina. He got a broadcasting degree at Eastern Kentucky University. He worked his way up to lead anchor at WSOC-TV Charlotte, the #1 television news station. And after almost 18 years as a local TV news reporter and anchor, Vince returned to radio, his first love in broadcasting. His first opportunity came when he was asked to fill in for Herman Cain on his national radio program in Atlanta, Georgia. In 2014, Vince's interest in civics led him to run as a candidate for North Carolina's 12th congressional district. Although he did not win his bid for Congress, his experience gave him a deeper appreciation for how our political system works, which is something I can relate to, since I just ran for office and did not win also. Vince currently hosts a weekday talk show on Word, and he is a voice for personal, spiritual, and political freedom. His listeners often refer to him as a breath of fresh air. Vince's primary passion is God's glory. As a minister of the gospel, he works in partnership with other leaders to help believers live healthy, functioning priests in the body of Christ. Vince's wife, Debbie, are the proud parents of 4 children. And I assume this is Mrs. Coakley here and one of the children. Okay, well, good. Well, thank you so much. Everybody give them. And we can put the screen down.
Okay, excellent. Thanks very much, Diane, and thanks very much, Keith. I enjoyed that presentation. That was, I think that was worth the price of admission, wouldn't you say? Let's give him a hand for that. I was just envisioning that would make a great radio segment. There's a lot of content in there that's certainly very helpful. I get a kick out of bumper stickers. In fact, as I was coming in, I couldn't help but to notice a couple of bumper stickers in the parking lot. And I just want to draw attention to a couple of those that I really liked. There were a number of others, so if I don't mention yours, don't be terribly disappointed. Let's see, no more Bushes or Clintons. That one's excellent.
Keith came up with that, and he's been selling them for $1 a piece.
Excellent, excellent. Good business proposition there. And the other one, loselindseygraham.com. Who's the I love it. It is absolutely wonderful. It is an honor and privilege to be here this evening. I want to share with you a couple of stories that kind of highlight the importance I place on the work that I do. I want to speak out of my heart this evening, and part of this to communicate kind of the love-hate relationship that I have with what I do. And I'll tell you what I mean by this. How many of you find this to be very intense and very life-consuming? And how many times do you find yourself asking the question, is it worth it? Can I continue doing this? Come on, does anybody in here wrestle with this? And this is an ongoing challenge. In fact, I'll give you an example of something I experienced. A couple of years ago, I met, actually it was an event, a Glenn Beck event in Texas. I met a guy from Delaware, a state I used to live in, and this guy was very active in his party. In fact, one of the things they did, even though the establishment of the Republican Party was bound and determined to keep control, and they even moved their meetings around without announcing them, just to keep the Tea Party as the Liberty people away, well, they followed them around. They kept following and following. Ultimately, what ended up happening is they took over that particular local party. And it was very successful. Well, a few days ago, I had a follow-up conversation with this guy. Unfortunately, things have kind of waned since that time, to the point where my friend has now registered as an independent and is no longer involved in a significant way in politics. This is a trend. This is a trend that's getting a lot of traction. And one of the reasons for it, there's a very high burnout factor. So at the risk of offending two groups of people, I will give you a comparison of what's also happening in our churches in America. I don't know if you realize this, but across the country, there is a trend, and I admit to being part of that, of Christians who have checked out of the religious system, are not participating anymore. And if you do the research and find out who is not participating anymore, it's not the backsliders, it's not the people who don't believe anymore, it's the people who are tired of dealing with a lot of BS, and they don't want to participate anymore. So I want to give that as a context of what's going on in our world and our culture, and how we have to make sure that we do everything we can to stay on point and to encourage and sharpen one another, because this battle is getting tougher and tougher every day.
Amen.
I want to share with you a couple of stories, in fact. One I just learned of yesterday evening. I want to touch on the Kim Davis thing in my former home state of Kentucky, and I'm very, very proud to say that one of the people I consider a friend in Congress, Congressman Thomas Massey of Kentucky, proudly stood with Kim Davis in supporting her in her efforts. And one of the questions I continue to pose to people is, which law did she violate? Can you point out which law this woman is in violation of, and why she is actually, she was put in jail? I also have to give a real salute to Mike Huckabee, who made an extraordinary point last night. How many of you heard what Mike Huckabee had to say? He made the point that one of the terrorists on trial in this country was given certain privileges and rights. His religious sensitivities were respected, and basically they were given greater precedence than Kim Davis has been given. There's something very wrong with that. Very wrong with this picture. I also want to share with you a story I just learned of last night. I have a good friend in North Carolina. She is in nursing as anesthetist. She also has a husband who is a doctor. And I happened to learn just yesterday evening, I knew she moved, I didn't realize why. And I learned the story behind why she moved. Her husband, it seems, was having a conversation, a private conversation with a patient. This patient just happened to wonder, hey, what is your thought on Amendment 1? Amendment 1 in North Carolina was legislation, of course, that defined marriages between a man and a woman. And he said, hey, this is, I believe in the Bible, what the Bible teaches about marriage. Just so happened that there was a man who I believe was a homosexual, a nurse who just happened to be walking by, overheard this. He made a complaint to the medical system and said that this comment created a hostile working environment. One of the things that I really want to get across to you, by the way, he has since moved on to another medical facility out of state. This is what's happening. This is the battle. And if there's one thing that I want to emphasize to you tonight, and I was very glad the encouragement to get pastors involved, I want to be as gracious as I can possibly be, and yet at the same time, I also want to be very firm and very blunt. There are a lot of pastors, a fire needs to be lit under their rear ends to stop focusing on church work alone and start focusing on things that really matter. Do not misunderstand what I'm saying, because I'm a believer in Jesus Christ. I also believe in the church that Jesus is creating. I do not believe in church corporations, and by that I mean too much of what we're doing is focused on ourselves. When Jesus came, he came as a sacrifice to lay down his life for others. And he served a redemptive purpose. And you can also look at certain figures in history. How about William Wilberforce, the man who took a stand against slavery in Great Britain? And fortunately, he was able to see an end to slavery. What was his influence? It was the gospel. Take a look at another significant example, Martin Luther King. Again, strong influence of the gospel. One of the things that's really important here is we have become very, very self-centered in our religious expression. And rather than being about serving and about cultivating something that's going to be beneficial to society, much of what we've focused on is very, very selfish. Did you know, and I wasn't intending to go here, but this is a freebie, roughly 80 to 90% of church budgets are spent on what? Us, ourselves. There's something wrong with this picture. And I can tell you this is one of the reasons why we're losing these so-called culture wars, because rather than engaging in the culture and society around us, we've been focused on doing all kinds of internal things that have no eternal value at all. And I know that's stepping on some toes, because you will hear people say, well, the important thing is to preach the gospel. Well, that's all wonderful. How much of that is taking place, too, outside of the four walls of a building? You see, this is where we've lost the battle, folks. We've lost the battle because we have been confined. In fact, how many of you know that there are efforts right now within government agencies? They have tried to change the oath, well, not the oath, but information for new citizens coming into the country. Rather than referring to freedom of worship, they're making freedom of religion. They've changed that to freedom of worship. Now, why do you think that is so important? Because most people, in their ignorance, see worship is something that takes place where? Inside a building. So you find little Christians, you just stay in your little building and mind your own business. That's what the world wants you to do. Amen. And you know what? We've complied. We've not had to, nobody's had to tell us that, because this is what we have been doing a good part of the last few decades. So as a result, while we've been busy having church, focusing on meetings and services, rather than being the body and learning how to be salt and light and functional priests in a community and penetrating our neighborhoods with the gospel and the life that we have, what has happened as a result? We've just been developing Christian ghettos that have little or no impact on the society around us. I was not intending to go there, but I did. I wanted to tell you about a project that I have started just a few months ago, and a little bit I'll also show you a video that gives you a picture of what we're hoping to accomplish. How many of you here are fans of John Boehner? Any John Boehner fans? How about Mitch McConnell? No, come on. One hand at least for Mitch McConnell. One of my concerns, and one of the things, and I raised questions way back at the end of the year. It's hard to believe, here we are almost a year out. At the end of my run for office, I remember asking the Lord, all right, what was that for? You know, after losing, and I was like, what was the whole point of this exercise? Well, one of the interesting things that's happened is my campaign manager is now the Republican Party chairman in North Carolina. He's the first black Republican chair in North Carolina, and I'm very excited for him. I also want to encourage you to pray for him. This man is under assault right now from the establishment of the Republican Party. So I want to encourage you to pray for him. That's one good benefit that's happened. He's there in that place. But the other thing that happened is I met some wonderful people last year. How many of you are supporters of this guy named Jeff Duncan? For good reason. I want to tell you, one of the most supportive people that I got to know last year and continue cultivating a friendship with is Congressman Jeff Duncan. You should be very proud of him. Please uphold him in your prayers. Do everything you can to support him. I wish there were 434 just like him.
That's right.
We would be in so much better condition. There's no question about that. But one of the things that started to happen last year is I realized I met a number of members of Congress. The Lord seemed to give me the opportunity to connect with people with the most conservative, the most constitutionally sound members of Congress. And I was starting to ask, well, what's the reason behind this? So as time passed, one of the ideas that came to mind was, how do we get more people like those members of the Freedom Caucus? Because that's what we need to do. We now have several dozen members of the Freedom Caucus. Those are the ones who are on the front lines of battle now, who are standing up to make sure that Planned Parenthood is defunded. How many of you want to pull the plug on Planned Parenthood and make sure they don't get one single dime of taxpayer money? The leading edge of that battle is taking place from the Freedom Caucus. Don't you find it amazing? There's only a few dozen people out of over 200 Republican members of Congress. Isn't that scary? Doesn't that tell you where we are? And I would dare say that we could have many more if we were purposeful in laying out a plan for getting these kinds of people into office in other districts across the country. One of the things I think that is a great target and a great purpose for next year is to make sure we replace the entire leadership team of the Republican Party. It needs to be replaced. I hope John Boehner is taken out in this resolution introduced by Mark Meadows from North Carolina. But beyond that, we've got elections coming up next year. And one of the things that's been on my heart is to make sure what is it we can do to educate voters, to give them a vision of what they should expect for a member of Congress. Because this is ultimately not about Republican and Democrat. It's not about left and right. It's about what's right and what's wrong.
That's right.
It's not about Republican and Democrat. It's ultimately about limited government versus the growth of big government. And unfortunately, the Republican Party has been out to lunch in this battle for quite some time. What I started to do was to begin a political action committee. It's called Sacred Honor USA. And the goal is to lay out basically a freedom and prosperity agenda. It's all about restoration. Let me just give you some perspective on this, and I think this is probably the prophetic part of me that's very much interested in this. If you look in the Old Testament, the prophets were concerned about one thing, and that was restoration of what God set up. Going back to the original foundation. How many of you have computers at home? How many of you have had a computer go down? And what's one of the things that a good computer technician will do to get your computer working again? Well, very often what they will do is a system restore. So it goes back to the time that your computer was working the way it was supposed to. And sometimes it means doing a clean install. You've got to get rid of all of those programs and the spyware and all of the unnecessary things that are dragging the performance of your computer down. I'm here to tell you that's what's happened to our country. Over the years, not only the laws that have been passed, but the Supreme Court rulings that have undermined our constitutional process. And you know what's sad about this? If you look at our history over the past 100 years, what has the Republican Party done to reverse any of these initiatives? Do you see any evidence whatsoever that the Republican Party has changed anything?
No.
See, I want to tell you folks, the Republican Party has been running a scam.
That's right.
And it's time for people to stand up and say, no more. We're not just going to vote for people just because they have R's behind their names. That is no longer going to be enough. Let me tell you something, folks. It's time that we send warriors to Washington, D.C., who are going to fight, and if they're not going to fight, do not send them. Absolutely do not send them. Before I show you a video that demonstrates what we are wanting to do all across the country, I want to give you a sense of the issues that we want to focus on. You see, how many of you are impressed by the debates that we've had so far? You know, they've been okay, but I want you to compare what you've been listening to last night and the last debate to what I'm about ready to share. Because again, I'm not interested in cutting and trimming along the edges and trying to fix this or try to address this little problem here or there. Think about it. Even on the Planned Parenthood issue, we're talking about what? $500 million of money? And I'm not saying that's not important. What I'm saying is the bigger picture is how much money are we spending right now that we really have no business spending because there's no constitutional authority to do so. Let me start here. We need to sunset plans for all unconstitutional government entitlement programs. All of them. Please show me a foundation in the Constitution for Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. Now, I know sometimes this can be a very sensitive subject, but we need to have this conversation. If we're serious about this, then we've got to say, well, wait a second here. Even if this affects me, I am willing to sacrifice to make sure that my children and my grandchildren are not saddled with debt and saddled with a system that will destroy this country. A strong national defense. Before I even go into that, I just threw this figure out. But wouldn't it make sense, for instance, to say, let's pass a law that 5 years from now, we will no longer continue these social welfare programs. We'll discontinue them. If the states want to do them, they can do those on a state level. But the federal government will not be involved because we don't have the constitutional authority to do so. See, that's the real dirty secret of these budgets. Most of the money is transfer payments from one person to another, and it's time to stop it. Now, let me just add something. Lest anybody get the idea that I would want to see anyone defrauded who's put money into Social Security. The fraud is in the fact that you don't have your own personal Social Security account. That is your money. And the idea that anybody ever thought it was appropriate to throw all of this into a pool and for this not to be yours to do with what you want, that's a scam. In fact, this whole thing is a Ponzi scheme, and we all know it. A strong national defense. A strong national defense. I think it is an abomination that when the sequester was agreed to, they put these social programs with no constitutional foundation right next to what? Defense spending. On the same level of authority and authorization. What's wrong with this picture? Well, there is a constitutional mandate for protecting us, for providing for the national defense. There is no constitutional mandate for all of these programs. And yet, the idea was to cut both of those equally. And now we're at a point that we have a military that in some areas is weaker than it was before World War II, which is absurd. I also believe we should support a non-interventionist foreign policy. This is one of the areas where we've gotten into a lot of trouble. How many of you are supporters of nation building? Going into other countries and showing them how to build democracy. I stole an idea from my dear wife, which is a good time to recognize my wife Debbie, who I greatly appreciate, who is here with me tonight, and my daughter Giselle, who's also come along for the ride. One of the analogies that she gave in talking about something else one time, they tell you, when you get on a plane, they always tell you, if there is rapid decompression and the mask falls down, what do they always tell you to do? Put your mask on first before you help somebody else. I'm here to tell you, folks, we need to put our masks on. Rather than going around and trying to show other countries how to do democracy, we need to save our own republic.
Yeah.
Wasn't intending to go into this. Let me just briefly mention this. Several years ago, I went to a conference in York County on Islam. It was one of the most earth-shattering encounters I ever had. I was listening to several presentations over a period of about 2-3 days on Islam. And this threat is not just in the form of terrorism, it's also in the form of what's called civilization jihad. I know you're very concerned, for instance, about the issue of refugee resettlement. Let's be honest here, folks. Those people who are promoting the radical Islamic agenda, one of their agenda items is essentially to colonize the United States of America. They're already colonizing Europe, and they're doing the same thing here in the United States.
That's right.
So we should not kid ourselves. That's one of their objectives. But one of the things that's important to understand is when I went to this conference, it was very shocking to me to learn that we had people even in the Bush administration at the time who were very comfortable with allowing counsel for members of the Council on American Islamic Relations, or CARE. Think about this, folks. Can you imagine back during the Cold War taking counsel from communists here in the United States on how to deal with the Soviet Union? That's exactly what's happening right now in this administration. And it happened in the Bush administration as well. This is one of the unfortunate things that's happened, and we have to address that. Non-interventionist foreign policy, and it's a very important step that we need to take. I think one of the unfortunate things that's happened is we've drawn these battle lines, and we've made this comparison between hawks over here and so-called doves over here. I think that's a very simplistic way to look at this, because I don't think that's very accurate. Just because someone is a so-called hawk does not mean that person is right. In fact, I think a lot of this hawkish behavior has gotten us into a lot of things that we don't need to be involved in, like supporting Syrian rebels. And in the process, we've ended up arming people that we should not have armed. How many people know what happened in Libya? And the fact that we've now opened this up to be a failed state. I mean, I cringe when I play the soundbite on the radio show of Hillary Clinton laughing, cackling, saying, "We came, we saw, he died." Seriously, about Muammar Gaddafi. Now, another freebie for you. I don't think that had anything to do with protecting Libyan citizens. I think it had something to do with the fact that Muammar Gaddafi had decided with other countries in Africa to have a currency that was backed by gold, that was going to be a threat to our paper currency here in the United States of America. That was all about economics, folks.
Exactly.
And we toppled this country, and as a result, we've opened the country up to Islamic influence. We did that, folks. This interventionism did that. Can I just throw this in too? I think there are some people who need to be tried, who need to be put on trial for treason, for helping to promote radical Islam. Honestly.
I think that's another murder that should hang around Hillary Clinton's neck.
Well, I'm not going to touch that one for right now. I just want to, because of a limited amount of time, I don't want to go into all those items. I want to encourage you to read more about some of the agenda items. But our goal is this. You folks are well educated here. You have got to help share your information. And one of the things that I found, particularly with the conservative and the Tea Party liberty movement, unfortunately we skew older. We've got to reach these younger generations. We've got to reach minorities. And we've got to do everything we can to make our ranks bigger. That is absolutely positively vital for the days ahead. And this is part of what we're working on. How many of you heard Rush talk about low and no information voters? How many of you have come to the conclusion that too many Republicans are in that category? And it's true. This is what we're up against, and this is one of the things that we're trying to work to accomplish, to reverse this trend. I want to tell you before I show you a video here, and then we'll open up any remaining time for any questions. One of the things that we'd like to do with the Political Action Committee is basically provide the tools that local parties and groups like yours can use in order to educate the public. Now, how many of you are familiar with Conservative Review website? Wow, just a few. All of you need to be familiar with Conservative Review. It's a great website. There are great posts there. Occasionally I have a couple of people on the show. Steve Dace I have on periodically. Daniel Horowitz, I've had him on the show several times. Now Mark Levin has come on board. I think he is now the top editor for Conservative Review. One of the things that I love is they have done their own score system for members of Congress. Now, one of the things that members of Congress have figured out how to do is to game the Heritage and the Freedom Work systems, because those are basically reset every 2 or every 6 years. Not with Conservative Review. Their Liberty score is a cumulative score. Now, I just want to give you an example. I happen to live in North Carolina. We have 11 members of Congress who are Republicans. Do you want to guess how many of those members of Congress have passing scores? 2.
I heard you say it on the radio.
You are a good listener, sir. There are 2. I had one on the program today, Walter Jones. He has a 70. The other person is Mark Meadows, who introduced the resolution to get rid of John Boehner. He is in the 90s. Everybody else in the North Carolina Republican delegation has D's and F's. Can you believe that? Yeah. Now, I know sometimes some of you get frustrated with certain members of your delegation. I won't mention any names tonight. I consider all of them friends, and I appreciate them all. But one of the things you may hear me from time to time tell people, what you have here in the upstate is light years better than what we've got north of the border and what most people have all across the country. All of your Republican members of Congress, they're in the 80s and the 90s with their Liberty scores. You should understand that. Please keep that in mind. Here's another little factoid for you, and you're going to see John Boehner's score in a minute. But all the members, there's about 11 members of John Boehner's leadership team. Do you know how many of them have passing scores? 1. And I think it's Steve Scalise. He has about an 80. And I think he's the number 2 or number 3 person in the leadership team. Everybody else has D's and F's. Do you wonder why the Republican Party is not standing up for anything in Washington? Because these folks are not conservatives. They don't believe in anything other than being elected and getting re-elected. So what we want to do is get this information in the hands of voters across the country so they can understand why. You know, 20%. Do you know what the figure is for approval of Congress among Republicans and the leadership? 20%. So people out there, I think it's a ripe time to communicate to people. Do you want to understand why these folks aren't standing up for you? There's a good reason they aren't standing up for you. They don't believe the same things you do. So if we can get this information in their hands, and this is part of what we want to be able to fund, I would love, if we're able to raise enough money, to send cards out to people, little postcards out to every single district that we target that has the Liberty score of that member of Congress. Now, our priority next year, we want to wipe out the entire Boehner leadership team. Our hope is that every single one of these folks loses, and there are 2 of these people in North Carolina. They don't belong in office. It's just that simple. And here's how I look at it. I'm just being honest. See, I think, and I said this to several members of Congress back in January before they had the speaker vote, I said, first off, it's pretty sad. Here we have more than 200 Republicans, and you're telling me you can't find anybody better than John Boehner. Think about it for a moment. The second thing that I said is, if you've been in Washington any longer than 2 years, and you can't think of anybody better than John Boehner to be Speaker of the House, I question your judgment. Honestly. I want to share this video with you because this is an example of what we've done in putting together something we're able to do in a way that's very inexpensive. And we have now shared this with folks in the 8th District of Ohio. It may be a moot point next year because if John Boehner loses his speakership, I suspect he's probably going to retire and not run again. But now's a great time to put the pressure on. So I want to just share with you this 1-minute commercial that we've produced.
It's going to come on the screen. And
I will step away so I don't get half of my screen.
And John, can you start? Good?
Amanda stand against President Barack Obama's radical plan to transform America. Someone to lead the charge of people in general, not Main streets. A man who's drawn a line in the sand on spending and debt. A man who stands against questionable trade deals. Sadly, we get none of these qualities in John Boehner. In fact, he's the man 60% of Republican voters wanted replaced as Speaker. But it's good news for Ohio's 8th District. You can 2016 to find a second replacement for John Boehner. Speaker Boehner has a conservative review liberties and have solid record. Wouldn't it be great to have solid representation in Congress? Amanda stand against President Barack Obama's radical plan to transform America. Someone to lead the charge of the people's agenda on State streets. A man who's drawn a line in the sand on spending and debt.
Can anybody hear it?
Sorry.
She's got to be.
Restart it, it's back and up to what it's trying to stay there, that's going to stay away from it. Just point it towards the,
Let me just,
Okay, sorry, y'all.
No problem.
Wouldn't it be great to have solid representation? Wouldn't it be great to have solid there we go. Representation. Wouldn't it be great to have
All right.
Technical difficulties. Or work on the Tina, did you get the results for the, we could go ahead and announce that one. Bring it up. Okay. You want to do
representation?
All right. Oh, we got it.
Wouldn't it be great to have
No.
solid representation in Congress? Amanda stand against
Okay. Well, we're working on that. I was going to announce. Okay, so it looks like for the members, we had 2 undecided. Donald Trump 6 and Ted Cruz 6. So I guess that was a tie. Scott Walker got 3 votes, Rand Paul 2, Ben Carson 2. And then for the non-members, we had 2 undecided. Ted Cruz got 9, so he was the winner. Ben Carson got 6. Kasich got 1. How do you pronounce it? Whatever. Anyway, Scott Walker got 1. Donald
And
Trump.
60% of
Yeah, that's better. Okay, yeah. Fiorina 3, Rand Paul 1, Lindsey Graham 1, and Bernie Sanders 2. So that was our result. So
wait a minute, who voted for you? Who's a traitor?
it might be. Well, let's see. That was a non-member.
Well, we welcome the members.
We welcome whoever it was to vote for you anyway. All right.
We're going to try this again.
Okay.
Wouldn't it be great to have solid representation in Congress? Amanda stand against President Barack Obama's radical plan to transform America. Someone to lead the charge with a people's agenda, not K Streets. A man who's drawn a line in the sand on spending and debt. A man who stands against questionable trade deals. But sadly, you get none of these qualities in John Boehner. In fact, he's the man 60% of Republican voters wanted replaced as Speaker. There is good news for Ohio's 8th District. You have until March 2016 to find a suitable replacement for John Boehner. Speaker Boehner has a conservative review liberty score of 35%, a solid F. Join the movement to advance the constitutional restoration agenda of we the people. Learn more and get involved at sacredhonorusa.com. Paid for by Sacred Honor USA PAC, not authorized by any candidate or candidates committee.
So what do you think, folks?
Very good.
And just in wrapping up, this is what we would like to do in some targeted races across the country. Basically put this kind of resource in the hands of local Tea Party groups and others to spread these videos, to share this information, get the Liberty Score information out to people, and help them vet candidates so we don't send duds to Washington. That's the bottom line here. So that's what we're about. I have some cards available if you'd love to be involved in this. And let me just say this, because I think this is really important. And I know from running for office, there are a lot of political action committees out there, and a lot of them are focused on particular groups. We want to work on this issue or that issue. We're focused on restoring our constitutional system. And as a result, one of the things, we're not a special interest group. So what we want to do is we'd like to get thousands, maybe even millions of people who say, you know, I'm willing to donate $25, $50 a month to help fund something like this so that we can help educate our fellow Republicans so they don't make the same dumb mistakes every 2 years, every 4 years, every 6 years. So if you'd like more information, we've got cards in this. You can go to our website, learn more. And this is, frankly, I'm in this to win. I'm not in this because I get up in the morning and feel like doing this, to be honest with you. There are times I'm ready to bang my head up against the wall. But you know what? One of the reasons I continue doing this is this young lady I'm looking at right here, my little 10-year-old Giselle. I want to make sure that she grows up in a country that is free. That she grows up in a country that I can say that I've done everything in my power so that she is able to appreciate the blessings of liberty. See, the beginning of that Constitution doesn't just talk about the people who set this system up, but it talks about a very important word, our posterity. And I know for us, especially those of us who are on the other side of the hill, we've got to be thinking about that. And for that reason alone, I want to encourage you, stand strong, stand firm, don't compromise, and don't settle. Because this battle is way, way too important for us to settle. Thank you very much. I appreciate your hospitality, your invitation, and look forward to continuing to interact and hear great things about all of you down here. Thank you.
Unless they're here to throw us out. If you need to leave, go ahead, but you can stay for another minute or two.
How's your health? How's your health? Your health?
Oh, very good, very thankful. For those of you who don't know, I had a little incident back in April with a heart attack, and happened a few days before the big 5-0, and I'm just very thankful to be here. Very thankful to be here. And I just went through 12 weeks of cardiac rehab, and everything looks pretty good so far. So I'm ready to resume and do what I do from day to day. I appreciate the question. Yes, sir.
My mailman in the hernia, bringing all the mail from the right-wing organizations after me for money. and I give up. On the other hand, it seems that somewhere somebody needs to start consolidating.
Yes.
Because many of the messages are listening,
Yes.
and it can't be economic to have so many different outfits sending out all of them.
Yes. And his point is about all the organizations. Let me tell you one of the things that I want to do and what we want to do. In fact, you'll see a number of links on our website for Sacred Honor USA. I'm not interested in reinventing the wheel and doing what other people are doing. In fact, one of the things that I encourage you to check out on the website, there's a link for a group that is trying to get more people involved in precincts. It's called the Precinct Project. And the goal is to make, you know, there are half of the Republican precincts, those positions are unfilled. Did you know that? And I want to encourage you, if you're not one of those precinct people, please pursue it, because that's an important method of having an impact on the party. So these are the kinds of partnerships I want to develop. I want us to be kind of a clearinghouse to connect with some of these other organizations, so we're not trying to compete with other organizations and do the same thing that they're doing. And that's a very, very fair point, because I think there's way too much of that. We're not competing.
Something real personal. My
Yes.
granddaughter was in the USS Navy at 19 years old, 20, she's 22 now, but she was in that strait where Syria is at. When Obama was going to drop that chemical weapon. Remember that? He was talking about
Yes.
dropping that chemical weapon because they was bombing, gassing these people, but it's really the refugees of, not the refugees, it was the leaders that was going to bomb them. I mean, it was all politics, you know. So I pray God to change Obama's mind about dropping chemical weapons.
I hear you.
Prayer worked.
Absolutely.
My baby was in that strait. It was very personal.
And I would just say, I think that was a significant thing. The American people did not want us getting involved in Syria.
No.
And if you notice, it wasn't just Democrats, it was Republicans, people like Lindsey Graham and others pushing for us to get involved and take military
It was
action.
the wrong people that was doing it.
Yes.
No, it wasn't. We were defending innocent people.
See,
were
we don't-
defending the crazy people.
And that's how we get in trouble. We get involved and end up on the wrong side,
Right.
helping people that we frankly don't know. It's not good. Not good at all.
God changed Obama. Prayer works.
Yes, keep praying. That's the
I
most
have a
important thing.
scripture, that's all. Isaiah 48:18. If only you had paid attention to my commands, your peace would have been like the river and righteousness like the waves.
I love it. It's awesome. Yes, sir.
Last question. John, go ahead.
What would you propose as a strategy to remedy the situation that in the black community over 90% of them, well over 90% vote Democrat, and just only a few percentage are conservative, anything, let alone conservative Republican? How do we reverse that?
I'd say the key thing there is engagement. And I think that I found this during my campaign last year. I was amazed how many people, I went to their house and they knew me from being on television, but they were very surprised because they found out, and I got emails from people, hey, I realized I'm actually conservative.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you shared what you did because, and in fact, this happened to me just a couple of months ago. There was a lady who came up to me at a coffee shop and she said, you know, I heard about you through one of the campaign workers who came to the house, and I realized I really am conservative, and I just didn't realize it. But you know what? This only happens with engagement. And I will tell you something. The establishment of the Republican Party doesn't want and doesn't care. I'm just being honest here. They don't care about engaging black people. They just don't. What they are interested in fact, who are they pandering to more than anybody right now? See, here's the irony of this. How did the Republican Party come about in the first place? The Republican Party came about because of the issue of slavery. So if anybody has a great argument to be able to go to black Americans and say, we care about you, it's made to order, all the way up to the Civil Rights Movement. Because without Republican votes, civil rights legislation would have never passed. So just engaging people, sharing this information, it makes all the difference in the world. And the bottom line, loving people.
Yeah.
That's the key thing. And that'll open up all kinds of doors that you can't imagine. If I can just say one very brief thing. I believe we're heading for some very dangerous times along racial lines. And I think now more than ever, those kinds of initiatives are going to be very necessary because we've got people who frankly want to start a race war and they want to stir up strife and conflict. But I do think there are people hungry for another way, economically and otherwise. They're not interested in stirring things up. They just want help. They want solutions. And I think many of you in this room have them. It's just a matter of you sharing of your heart, sharing of your life, and that can make all the difference
And
in the
that's
world.
especially true in Lawrence County. The race thing is terrible in Lawrence County.
Absolutely.
And we love black people. Black people got to chill. We don't.
I'm glad to hear that. Thank you.
We love them.
Thanks for.
We love all people.
I just want to thank everybody for coming tonight, and thank you so much for coming. You drove from North Carolina. Wow, I
It's
really
my
appreciate
pleasure.
that.
Enjoy.
Really appreciate that, and thank you so much for everything you do for your employees. That was very encouraging tonight. Thank you. All right, let's